I'm going to read today from Volume 11, Chapter 18, Precious Timing for Assistance. I really like this chapter. I feel like it has a lot of essential ideas in it, and I just find that the timing of when we act is really underestimated as far as how we really caretake it, that moment of action. Like, are we in midwifery, or are we actually knowing that it's a right place for us to stay grounded and in our body rather than stay grounded in indecisive action? Chapter 18, Precious Timing for Assistance. What is that sweet spot in which a midwife observes the need for help and then moves to provide it? Are there times that we delay assisting a baby that we know needs help because we don't want to intervene in the natural process? Are there times our bodies are driven by a nervous system impulse to act, even when help may not be needed? Finding the sweet spot or tipping point from observational patience to action is the crux of the art of midwifery. Dr. Emiliano Chavira, an obstetrician, maternal fetal medicine specialist, and breech baby himself, was speaking at a recent midwifery conference and mentioned the importance of the timing of decision-making for when to be hands on the breech. I have to admit, it is rare for me to hear an obstetrician discuss the internal processing and pacing around patients, but he really expressed thoughts that were already circulating in many midwives' minds as well. He talked about the reasons he might move earlier to help rather than later. Chavira said, "There really isn't a right moment." He talked about the window of time in which you can act. You can go in earlier in this window, and you can go in later before the window closes. You just don't want to be too late, in case it takes some time to release the baby. We also must go in with decisive intent and know which maneuver we are going to do instead of just touching and doing things randomly. I, too, have suspended these moments and analyzed them. That tipping point of when to act and not act is rich with this savored tension. This is really what midwifery education is about when guiding our discernment. These are the suspended moments of awareness that are refined over a lifetime. We might start out with cookie cutter or protocol timing, but even that has its nuances. Midwives eventually will combine these guidelines as we hone our inner knowing or intuition through our previous experiences of action and inaction. Unfortunately, the right timing may sometimes be defined more by our belief systems of who we are or want to be as midwives than how we are being present at the birth. Sometimes ideologies restrict us and prevent us from trusting ourselves and even trusting this baby who is asking for help right in front of us. In order to act, we sometimes must break a rule or even break what seemed to be a promise. It might seem we have to prove that help was really needed before we can actually intervene. This part of us that wants to trust birth might feel it has to wait until the baby declines rather than help it before it loses its vitality. We don't have to wait for that decline if we realize that the baby needs help sooner. No one wants to wait too long and have a baby that is in serious trouble because we were waiting to prove that help was indeed necessary. As a midwife who has come from a belief system that the hands-off midwife is the best kind of midwife, these thoughts still arise in my mind and can affect my decision-making of when to act for any baby. I find that inner young midwife self talking to me and even judging me. I know she needs validation. She needs to know that even if I cannot prove the baby was going to die without my help, she will still be loved. she will still be valued in the way I practice in this season of my life with a deeper discernment. She is functionally there to take care of me and protect me so I don't break the old rules and judge myself later. She keeps me true to who I have always wanted to be as a midwife. In that way, she is still part of my becoming. I can compassionately sit with that part of myself later after I help. For now is the time to act. If we justify a need to wait through these innocent eyes, we might end up missing the window completely and finding ourselves with more interventions, including a baby who needs greater resuscitative measures or a transport to the hospital. Midwifery is not about ideology. It is about presence with what is unfolding from one moment to the next. The card game. When I was teaching normal birth at a local midwifery school, one of my favorite parts was taking it out an old birthing from within card game called Do the Next Best Thing game, created by Pam England, that was made for parents. I would add sticky notes to the top of the cards for midwife students. This card game wasn't about having the right answers. It was about the process of how we came to make decisions when many times there aren't right answers. In this card game, the facilitator of the group creates 4 stacks of cards. The first stack of cards has scenarios that could happen at birth. Pam called these birth fairy cards. The birth fairy, by the way, has a grand sense of humor. Many random things can happen that we don't expect, and she brings that unpredictable quality to the game. The second stack of cards are time cards. In labor, these time cards can be spread over hours, days, or minutes. For the acute moments of the baby emerging or immediate postpartum scenarios, these time cards are in smaller increments of seconds or minutes. For a breech deck, these time cards would be small as well. The third stack of cards were solutions, or things that the student might do or acknowledge in response to the unfolding scenarios brought forth by the birth fairy. These cards were divided amongst the players, and they would be spread out in front of each midwifery student face up so that they could see them. The students would then be able to choose from their options as a response to the birth fairy's scenarios and the time cards. I sometimes would give one student fewer cards than the other, which would bring up good conversations too, because some might have more tools or resources in their box than another person. I also gave them all wild cards. That way they could choose anything to do with these scenarios from their knowledge of birth. The red card. The final card stack that I added, especially since the title of the class was Normal Birth, was the red card that signified that things were no longer normal. Sometimes this card would be the transfer card. Other times it would be the urgent action card of an emergency. Over time, this card came to represent more than just an emergency, or that things were no longer normal, or that it was time for a transfer. I began to watch the students form a relationship with this red card alongside their decision-making process. This card provided insight into the processes of their internal decision-making and nervous system responses. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the potential circumstances that arose or the timing of those circumstances. Amidst a simple game, I was getting insights into the body language around the red card. This red card would sit down right next to all the solution cards that laid passively on the floor in front of them. When the scenario was no longer normal, the students were supposed to throw this card into the middle of our circle. Much of the time, the game progressed with students choosing cards for providing words or encouragement, offering comfort measures, feeding someone in labor, or listening to the baby's heart rate. All the while, this red card just sat passively by their sides. Now and then, when there were longer time cards than expected, some of their hands would hover above this red card, waiting to pick it up. Some students would lay their hand upon the red card. Some would look to the other students to see what they were doing, their eyes darting back and forth. Others would quickly throw it to the middle. No one was wrong, and no one was right. They just were. As the minutes passed and the tension of the game increased, I would find many people holding this red card. It was no longer lying passively on the ground. It was alive. It had moved into action inside of their minds. You could see people's bodies move back and forth, thinking, readying. Allow me to point out that these midwives who were holding the red card hadn't thrown it to the center of the room. So the scenario was still, quote unquote, normal. One time the scenario card was a surprise breach, and all the cards went flying through the air to the center of the room except for a few people. One confused woman asked me, "Who is my preceptor?" Because for her preceptors, the card would be thrown into the center, and for another preceptor, she would set it back down passively onto the table again. This holding of the red card is an awareness of, and sometimes a response to, that potential window. This holding of the red card is part of the art of our timing and decision making. This holding is where we feel a shift from within ourselves, from passive patience to active or observational patience. Our nervous systems have changed. They have engaged, not in a negative or fearful way, but in a beautifully present way. We are now tracking a myriad of things in the room with our own bodies and minds, and we can continue to be grounded in this process. Releasing a red card from our hand isn't giving up and transferring. It is the call that something must be done in this moment as a bridge to the next moment. Is it possible to intervene so that we don't actually have to throw the red card that we are holding in our hand? Where is the line of holding it and letting go? There's more to this chapter, but those are two parts that I just love. Hope to make this card game someday just because it's so valuable. I think one of our limitations is we're teaching people how to do things, and thinking and discernment and all of the things that go into that moment in time where we feel the tipping point. I just feel like that's just part of such an important part of our work.